per square foot, remodeling is more expensive than building new.
Yep.
And every trade is more expensive when you bring them in on a remodel as opposed to bringing them into a brand new build.
We bought a house that needs to be fully renovated, so instead we're going to live in a camper.
A super modern house, and it's like, well, your house has a turret. Like, it looks like a French chateau.
All right. Hey, guys. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Design Build podcast. I'm so excited you're here. I'm Eli with Grizzly Mountain Construction, and this is...
I'm Brittany Grogan with Hailis Design.
And we're excited you're here. This week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about renovation versus new construction, when you should do one or the other, or I guess our opinion on, you know, the pros and cons of renovation versus the pros and cons of new construction, everything that it entails as much as we can.
How the process kind of differs between which camp you fall in.
Yeah, exactly. Because they are going to be a very different process in some aspects. I mean, it's still a house, but there are very different processes.
And the way that you work with your builder and the way that you work with your designer is going to look different depending on scope of the project.
Yeah. So anyway, before we get into that, how are you, Brittany?
Just dandy.
What have you been working on?
Well, I was on site this morning.
Okay.
We have a custom home going up in North Rim, and, you know, just typical stuff. The painter had a control sample that they made, and none of the stain, none of the trim is looking quite like the control sample. So we had to troubleshoot some stuff, and I wish I was more of a mixologist, like... You know,
have you seen those guys on Instagram that will, like, you'll literally just take them a paint color that or whatever it is that you want to match, and they're like, yeah, and they just do these things. And
I have a guy that can do that, and he's incredible, like with faux finishes, or and you tell him, I would like this rock to look like a diamond. He can do it. I mean, it'll be clear and reflect light. It's bonkers, but he charges for his premier services. So for most jobs, he's not brought in unless like things are really going sideways.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they were able to use some paint thinner, pull some of the stain off of the doors that they had already stained. The veneer is just not taking it like the solid would, which is surprises zero people, but we didn't have a control sample for the veneer for the doors. So, just a little bit of a hiccup, you know, when the painter calls at 6 a.m., like, we're going and it's not looking right. And you're like, cool. Let me bring my expertise to the table, which is, I don't know, make it look like wood. But we got some things figured out, I hope. That was my day so far.
And so this is in Bend, right? This house? So it's probably a fancy house.
It is. This is the project that I am like... I could retire after this. It's so stinking cool. Yeah. Like, just hang my hat on this and I'll be like, I did this. And you're welcome, world, because it's amazing.
Sorry, did you say it was a new build or a renovation?
It's a new build.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. So we've been working on this for heavens to Betsy. We're coming up on 2 years.
Jeez. Yeah.
So
but that's also not super uncommon for custom builds.
And not of this caliber. No, it's absolutely a luxury custom home. The homeowners are, in an incredible way, excited and have input in every single phase of the process.
That's nice.
And it's been awesome.
Cool.
What about you?
I am not working on a super fancy home right now. We are working on the local camp up here, up in the Ochocos. We are remodeling 2 of their bathrooms.
It's like the exact opposite.
So it's like the exact opposite. It's
commercial.
like really pretty versus this needs to survive a tsunami sort of thing. Like when you have 500 campers for a weekend, this bathroom needs to survive that.
I don't even want to imagine what happens in those bathrooms.
I know. So it's very very commercial, very industrial. Like everything is like, is this going to survive a 6th grader kicking it 100 times? Because he's like, it's no joke. Like there are some things, and I worked at a camp like for 2 years.
And I have teenagers, so.
Well, I worked at a camp for 2 years, and I was summer staff before that. But You'd be surprised. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily probably be totally surprised, but just some of the things that the kids do, they're like, yeah, I just thought I would punch this wall over and over again and see what happened. It's like, well, you put 30 holes in the wall. Thank you for doing that.
That's what
Or
happens.
I wanted to know what would happen if I took my pencil and I jabbed it into the mattress. And you're like, oh, what happened? Did it make a hole? Cool. I could have told you that. So it's just one of those things where it's like, it's so different than what you're doing right now, but it's like, it's commercial tile, you know, we put, over the framing, we actually did OSB and then drywall on top of that.
Okay.
Because they're like, I want these walls to be as solid as can be. And like, if a kid decides to punch the wall, he's going to regret it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very different project right now. But we're almost done with that. Hopefully we'll be done. I'd like to be done Wednesday, but we'll probably be done with it Friday. Just because that's how things go.
At least it warmed up.
It did warm up. They didn't have to chain up, or at least they haven't had to chain up the last few days going up to the camp.
Yeah.
And it's not like the building we're working on is like in main camp. It's up a hill, a back hill that hardly gets plowed, and it's super steep. So yeah, they have to pull into the shop at camp, you know, throw on chains, and then hope that they make it up the hill. So
I bet there's stories just right there.
Yeah.
With some good stuff.
So they're excited to be done with that, but then they have another project that they want us to do later in the year that we may end up doing. It's another bathhouse. So we'll see. But that's kind of what's been going on. It's just a bunch of, I don't know. It looks nice, but it's still just commercial. It's just, you know, it's camp nice, if that makes sense. If you've ever been to camp, you
fresh
know there's
and
camp
clean.
nice. It's easy to clean, fresh and clean. So
which is huge.
Yeah. Do you have a hot take for us today?
Yeah. This one, I mean, I want your opinion.
Okay.
Are you being asked, or what's your opinion on accent walls as a category?
Accent walls is a category,
yeah.
Huh? I have a couple accent walls in my house. Actually, I have one accent wall in my house. I guess I will specify where my fireplace is. I have a green wall.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. My wife likes it.
Accent walls of paint.
Accent walls of paint, yes. I don't have any other accent walls, like with built-ins or anything like that on it. No, I mean, I think it looks nice. What are you getting at here? What don't you like about accent walls? What's your hot take on accent walls?
I mean,
be better than me. What is it?
Have more of an opinion. As a very broad and general rule, I don't love them.
Okay, why?
And I guess I should specify, I don't love just painted accent walls.
Okay.
Typically I haven't found a situation where like the room gets worse if more walls are painted. Like why just one?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your whole living room should be that color.
Yeah.
If you love it, you should just do the thing and commit. Yeah. It, like all of these like rules of designing, I can think of so many situations where I've recommended the exact opposite because they really are room specific and space specific.
Yeah.
But typically if somebody's like, I want to do a bold color, but I just want it right here.
Yeah.
I'm like, you should be bolder.
Bolder. More green. Well, and in our defense, like the wall is painted, but it's also like we have a white fireplace, like a white shiplap fireplace with a nice mantelpiece there that kind of goes up to the ceiling. So it's not just the wall is painted green, but it's like the green is sandwiching the white fireplace with the tile and, you know, the nice natural wood beam and stuff like that. So it's not just we painted one wall green. I mean, we did do that, but there's more on that wall than just green.
Yeah, for calling your fireplace wall an accent wall might be
cheating.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, well,
maybe.
It's okay.
But I also like your accent wall, and you don't have like a room to paint green because it's all open then to your dining room and to. So
yeah,
I mean, you're not breaking rules, but more and more, I recommending more of a commitment to like color or boldness. So like instead of wallpapering one wall or putting wood paneling on a wall or doing I don't know, it just feels like like a low level commitment. And I want somebody to be all in on their fancy.
Yeah.
So like the last couple of wallpaper walls that we did, we wrapped it all the way up the ceiling and across the ceiling too. And it was
Really?
like, that's cool. Like that's more than
Up on the ceiling?
yeah. And it looks
I'd have
awesome.
to see it. Yeah. My hot take is hell no. But
I'm doing that.
I have to see it.
It looks so cool
Okay.
because it's unexpected.
Do you have a
and
picture
it
of
is
it?
yeah.
Okay. You have to send it to me. Maybe we'll superimpose it over the video or something like that. We'll throw a picture up.
Well, I can tell you they're on my Instagram page.
Okay. Everyone go to Brittany's Instagram.
Maybe not yet,
Okay.
but they are.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you. You'll
Okay.
like it.
Okay.
We'll
Maybe I
put it
will.
up.
Okay.
It'll be a fan favorite
Yeah. Okay.
because I'm not wrong. It looks so cool.
I guess I can trust your design sense. My lack of design sense says no wallpaper on the ceiling. That's weird. But
Once you see it,
yeah.
it'll be a convert.
Yeah, maybe. Don't show my wife.
I'm showing her all of it.
I know
You're
you
gonna
are.
you're gonna be in the middle of a room with wet wallpaper draped all over your head, trying to figure out how to get it on the ceiling.
Oh no!
This
I'm gonna
is
hire
predictions
someone.
for the
I'm not
future.
I'm not gonna hang wallpaper. I won't
This
do
is
it.
what's gonna happen.
I've taken off enough wallpaper, like for my grandparents' house. I remember, like, because they went through the process where everything was wallpapered,
Yeah.
and then they went through the process of steaming the old wallpaper off to try and scrape it off to repaint.
Yeah, those cutter tools.
Those cutter tools, that was horrible. Yep.
Yeah,
And I didn't get paid for it.
No.
It was just me being a good grandson.
sure. Sure, you got cookies or something.
I mean, they
Something
were
like
great
that.
grandparents.
Okay,
But
moving right along.
sorry. Excuse me for talking about my grandparents. So we're going to get into renovation versus new build. I guess kind of the
Yes.
first thing we want to talk about is maybe the pros and cons of each. And then, or do you have another spot that you want to start?
No, that sounds great.
Okay.
So this is a situation that like I'm in right now where we are listing our house soon and we have lived in our house for a long time. And about 7-8 years ago now, we really weighed out selling versus staying and remodeling. We at that time chose to stay and remodel because we loved the neighborhood.
Yeah, you're in a
loved our
great neighborhood.
neighbors. Loved the things that it was giving our kids as they grew up. So we chose to remodel that house. We ended up adding about 1,000 square feet to the house, doing a huge overhaul. It was like a split entry, and we ended up moving the kitchen, living room, and dining room all down to the lower level in a new space, and then really making it our own. So I think, but right now we're looking at, okay, we know what living through a remodel looks like, and we could build or we could find another house, another neighborhood, another kind of established situation, and we know that we're capable of making it through
Renovating,
a remodel and going through that. So we're kind of weighing these options out. I think a lot of people with the market uncertainty are kind of weighing out what makes the most sense right now, what looks like the best thing for our family, as much as anybody can predict the future.
Yeah.
But there are definitely a lot of factors to consider when weighing those two things.
Yeah. And we've always, my wife has decided that she doesn't want to live in another renovation. But then we bought a house that needs to be fully renovated. So instead, we're going to live in a camper. So I think, too, that's another thing to think about is where are you going to live during the renovation? Because you have to have somewhere to live during a new build. But during renovation, a lot of times people are like, well, I can just live in the house. And the reality is, depending on the scope of the renovation, like if I'm just doing one bathroom, it's a little different than you bought this house and it needs to be completely overhauled. And you're going to add 1,000 square feet or, multiple bedrooms, then, you're not living in that. There's just no way. So I think just kind of trying to figure out what the best option is there.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is both processes. I think that everybody needs to be as realistic as they can. Both processes are stressful. So remodeling, building, they both involve 1,000,001 decisions,
Yes.
1,000,001 conversations. So, yeah, they're both just inherently stressful, and kind of choosing your hard in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Makes a lot of sense. So if we're looking at, like, if we take my family as a case study where we're looking at remodeling or new construction, one of the biggest factors that we're going to look at is financial. That's
For sure.
Everybody, no matter what it is, has a budget for the most part. So looking at what that budget is and what we can accomplish with what we have. So typically on a new build, right, you have several options. So we could go a production build route, which means a new neighborhood with a production builder, which is a little bit less expensive. And there's the possibility that we would have some kind of built-in equity by the time the house was completed if the market continues to
Because you're
appreciate
building in an establishing
has.
neighborhood too, which is also bringing up home values and
or building a custom home on a piece of property or in a new neighborhood or in a new development, or remodeling and renovating, which for us would be a major, pretty extensive renovation, just because I'm me.
Yeah.
Because I don't like one accent wall. I like it all.
You want the whole thing to be bold.
No. So the trying to weigh kind of those options. So as far as a new build versus a renovation, there are definitely certain neighborhoods that have a huge appeal.
Yeah.
Some of those neighborhoods have historic homes, which, being able to buy something that has a lot of character, that has a lot of craftsmanship and a lot of beauty kind of inherent in the structure already. I mean, my dream is like to have a house with secret passageways and like all kinds of cool stuff.
Super cool.
Those are few and far between where we're at, but
Unless you build it.
but I would love to buy like a super old house.
Yeah.
Chad's never going to let me build a new house with secret passageways. It's going to be like, this is the moment where you've stepped off the deep end. No.
Oh, that's funny.
But so there's certain neighborhoods that have an appeal. And I think that's one of the huge pros of renovating is that you're inheriting something that's established, whether that's, landscaping and trees or neighbors and neighborhoods and all of the things that go into these
School
great
districts,
communities.
Yeah.
Either community amenities or, there's neighborhoods that have street parties and barbecues and, kind of this culture of the neighborhood that is established. So you get all of that. And that's kind of a known quantity when you choose to renovate or remodel, which is a huge pro, I think, in that category. New builds, usually neighborhoods are developing, or, you're out so far that neighbors aren't really
That's true.
a concern.
Well, and even just speaking like to what we're wanting to do, because we're going the renovation route, but we're going the renovation route because we found a property that is what we want. So I think a lot of it too is, if there's a house already on the property, is it worth renovating, or do you build new, or, something like that? But it's, we found the property that we liked. We found the acres that we liked. It's got a creek running through it. Like, it's got all these things and it's got a pond on it. Like, we have all these things that we know the kids are going to love, that we're going to love. It's going to fit the lifestyle that we want. Like, my wife wants a place to put her horses. My kids do 4-H. Like, it's more acreage than we probably really need. But also, who's to say that's true? Maybe I really do need 37 acres, and I'll find something to use it for.
Yeah, that's like so many acres per person.
It is. Yeah,
your
it's family. Actually, it's a lot. Yeah, each one of our kids can have like 5 acres.
Little plot.
But yeah, I think, just speaking to like the neighborhood or where you're building, like, it may be worth it to you to renovate as opposed to do a new build if there's a house already in place that maybe just maybe it does need, a square footage expansion, or maybe it just needs a facelift. Like, just things to be thinking about as you're, as you're looking at the renovation process. Is the house that you're looking at going to, or can it be renovated to a point where it fits your family's needs and desires moving forward? And like, even looking at that like 5, 10, potentially even 15-year timeline, like, what's going to change in your family? Are you going to have more kids? Like, really kind of what you're saying, like taking into account where your family's at now, but also being able to try and look in the future and say, like, these are the things that like we know we want to work towards, and will this property, will this neighborhood, will this whatever it is it going to fit in that plan with the lifestyle that we want, or the way that we want to raise our children? So, and that's just kind of what we're looking at. It made sense to pursue this acreage because we're going to have the ability to expand and do the things we want to do with our kids. And, we really want our kids to be able to run around and play outside, like in the dirt, and, be with the animals. And I mean, basically we want to start our own little commune, but, that's kind of, that was what we were looking for though. So,
Right.
Yeah.
With a new build, the real pros of considering a new build, and I'm going to talk specifically just about custom homes.
Yeah.
I think there's pros to a production home. Most of those are going to be the neighborhood amenities that are for the school district and
the HOA amenities. Yeah.
And then the cost, the overall value of a production build is really attractive. For a custom home, the big pro with pursuing a new build is that you are able to build a home that works for you.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to reimagine what's existing, like what we're figuring on your house, where we're like, there is just no way to put a primary suite that is far away from where the kids' bedrooms are going to be, which is high on everybody who has kids. That's high on their wish list. But there's just constraints with the property, with the house, with the footprint, with the utilities that are there. We can't do it. So that doesn't get to happen on your priority list. With a custom build, there's really the things that are going to tell you no is your budget. No, baby, you can't afford a theater room on top of whatever. So
whatever. I'm gonna have a theater room.
But not, budget notwithstanding, you can get exactly what you want when you're pursuing a custom build. The other huge advantage with custom builds, and I know this just from looking at innumerable houses in production neighborhoods where they're like, the views are that way, and there's no windows on that wall. Just the ability to take advantage of the natural features of your land or lot, the ability to build a house that fits with the land's contours, that fits with the existing trees and vegetation and all of those things, and to really get a house that takes best advantage of even like sun path. And, those are all things we do, solar studies, all of those things on, do you like waking up to morning light? We can put your bedroom over here, which is really exciting if you have the ability to think like that and do that.
Well, even looking at the property, that my wife and I are looking at, is I went through and I tried to figure out the sun mapping and everything for that property. And it's like, because I thought about just tearing that house down and rebuilding elsewhere. But the reality is the spot that the house is on gets the most sun. If we were to take it closer to the rim rock or closer to the hillside, we would have hours in the day in the winter where we just wouldn't see sunlight. And so it's like that's really important to, I guess, really important to my wife. It's really important to me, to have that sunlight. And so keeping the house there only made sense. Now we could still tear it down and rebuild, but at that point, I don't know. I think, just working with what we have is probably the better option, because of the budgetary piece, because I don't have a bunch of money. I have this much money. So anyway, so I guess let's talk cost for a minute. Pricing differences. So I think it's pretty common for people to think, okay, we're going to renovate. It's not going to be as expensive as a new build. And that's, yeah.
I think that this depends on where you start.
Yeah.
So if you are able to find, and we've always looked for houses that we've flipped, or the houses that, we've looked to as homes for our family. We have looked for houses that are distressed, that we can get at a really great deal or under market value. So there was already a lot of equity potential in our starting place.
Yeah.
Which is huge when you're considering a big renovation or a renovation that's going to help a home make sense for your family.
Yeah.
So I think that depends where you start. Now, per square foot, remodeling is more expensive than building new.
Yep.
And every trade is more expensive when you bring them in on a remodel as opposed to bringing them into a brand new build.
Yeah.
This continues to confuse people. I don't think it's talked about enough.
Yeah.
But tying into the existing structure, foundation, everything from the foundations to the wiring and the plumbing, the roofing, all of those things, tying into the existing and making a disjointed system work as a whole is more expensive.
It is.
The end.
Yeah. Well, and true. I mean, the reality is most people that are remodeling houses are having their home renovated. The house was built in, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s.
Sure.
Things aren't square. Like that's also just, things aren't straight. Things are out of level. Things have settled. Things have settled. Your electrical, while it may be working right now, was put in the 50s and no longer meets code. Like there's just so many things that come with renovation that can drastically increase the price quickly if you're not prepared for them.
Yes.
Like the house that we're looking at right now, like we initially didn't want to, but the reality is we're going to have to jack the whole house up 12 inches so that we can get the home out of the floodplain. And that's something that like I kind of knew was a thing, but I was like, it can't be like that hard. And granted, I have the ability, I have the crew, like I have the ability to jack the house up and do what I need to do. But those are just things like you don't think about, like when you buy a house necessarily. It's like this house is in a floodplain. You may you may know it's in a floodplain, but you may not realize in order to do any renovations to the house that you want, you have to then raise the house out of the floodplain.
Yeah.
Because they won't let you remodel the home in the floodplain.
Well, and like a great example of kind of the way that costs snowball quickly. Like our house, we, bought the house, go to remodel the house, and the breaker box, some jackwagon, built a bathroom around where the panel was installed, which is illegal as all get out. So we know we have to move the panel. That's going to happen here. We needed to expand the service to the house, and we knew we needed to move the panel and get it out of the bathroom. Not just because that's stupid and unsafe, but because we were required to. You're going to put a new shower in here? Guess what you also have to do? This is no longer grandfathered in.
Yeah.
Now you have to move it. Now, because you're moving the panel, did you also know that your service is outdated? So now you have to upgrade your service. And then did you also know that the drop connecting the house to the transformer is also now not, so this dominoed
not compliant. Yeah.
really quickly. Like we're touching one thing, and because we touch this one thing, we get to do 6 more things.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a remodel reality.
Yeah.
So moving into a remodel, I mean, we've talked about this when we talked about money. Moving into a remodel without a contingency is bonkers.
Well, and that takes because I can, we just did this on a project, but a panel change out was like $3,000, right? But then once they had to replace the meter, they had to drive, a new rod into the ground. We had to get the power company out here to turn everything off. Like it went from a $3,000, panel change out to a $8,000 panel change out, meter change, all of the labor it took. And it's just, you don't think about how quickly it will double, if you have to move something that you don't expect to move.
Right.
So.
Right. So those are driving factors. The cost, the contingency is typically you want to withhold more of a contingency on a remodel than you would even on a new build. There's just far more unknowns on a remodel than on a new build typically.
Well, and the reality is the contingency on a renovation is going to be spent fixing things that are unknown, whereas like the contingency on a new build is going to be like, I want to change this thing, and so the contingency is going towards a change order as opposed to, something you have to do versus something you want to do.
Yeah, or something that the builder didn't properly plan for or estimate at the beginning of a project. Yeah. Like this project that I was on today, the builder bid everything, and then it turns out the driveway grade is too steep for asphalt, which is just not something anybody really thought about at the beginning of the project. But that's a huge upcharge to go to concrete or to go to pavers is a significant swing. And that's what the contingency is being used on here.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
We did not know that there was a limit on that, or we didn't think the driveway was that steep, or I don't know what the thing was, but it was just like, can we maybe save $60,000 somewhere, guys? Because now we get to do a driveway. So
those get your theater room.
The theater is canceled. Just those types of things. So those are kind of the big misconceptions, like you said, about remodeling. I will say, depending on where you start with remodel, you do have more of a chance of finishing the project with some equity. A new build, especially if we're talking about a custom home, you're going to be pushing the limit of being able to capture any equity.
Yeah. If you're building a $2 million home in a neighborhood where all the homes are $2 million, you have a $2 million home.
Yeah. In our area right now, I will say pretty confidently that with like a luxury custom build, you will be upside down at the end. You will not. It will be years before the market appreciates enough to meet the build cost. And we're just in a real unique time where, labor costs have skyrocketed over the last 3 years. Material costs have gone up, and they still have not come back down. Where it's just expensive to build.
They probably won't. I mean, they're not going to come back
but
down.
Right now, pricing a new build luxury home is more expensive than going into one of those neighborhoods and buying something that is 2 years old. Yeah, for sure. And we're looking at real, apples to apples as far as quality and craftsmanship and those types of things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So really the choice of a new build becomes more about, are the priorities, getting exactly what I want, something that's going to live really well for my family, something that's going to, I want to wake up to the mountains every morning, and I want to go to bed every night with the sunset behind those mountains, and I'm just not going to get that in this neighborhood where the house is twisted the wrong way or whatever. So those have to be real drivers as opposed to the equity component. Yeah. It's, we can play with numbers and project scope and really look at and evaluate the equity in your home if we're looking at a remodel. And we can tailor that project scope to what makes sense for the equity that you have. If you've lived here for 20 years, you bought it 20 years ago, I'm hoping you have some considerable appreciation and you've got some room to where you could sell this house and at least cover your costs or make money on the project.
Buy something else. Yeah. Yeah. Which, that's always why I have been on the side of renovation, is because I buy a distressed property, or I'll buy something that's more distressed. I like the equity on the back end. When we bought our house in 2017, it was the worst house on the block, and it had been sitting vacant for 2 years. But I knew that we would be able to buy it, I would be able to do the work, and we would be sitting on equity when we go to sell. And so I think for me, I've always wanted to do the equity play as much as I can. But I also, not everyone has or is comfortable enough or has the ability to do a renovation themselves, which, which was pretty easy for me to do for the most part. But I mean, yeah. And I think going back to the renovation piece, like you're saying, some of the important parts with the new build is it going to meet these specific needs that you have? Are you going to be able to have the custom home of your dreams that you wake up staring at the mountains or, whatnot? Some of that can be, the reason you're choosing to renovate an existing property as well, or instead of building new, because that house, maybe it's not big enough right now to fit your family, but it was somewhat planned out to where you can look at that and go, okay, I can see how to use this current footprint or how to use this home and expand these aspects and be able to get those things that I want. And it is going to be a little bit cheaper, potentially a little bit cheaper than building a custom home.
Yeah, one of the things and the cost factors that goes into that may be a little bit cheaper is the permit side. So permits on a renovation are typically a lot cheaper, mostly because you avoid that initial systems development charge, which in our area, depending on which county you fall in, can either be astronomical or
still expensive,
significant.
But significant or astronomical. There you go.
But you avoid kind of those setup charges. The other thing that's kind of one of those not hidden costs, but unknown is, the cost of running utilities, the cost of running all of those things. Like on a new build, you're setting up construction access and then you're setting up the finished driveway and so you're doing a lot of kind of the groundwork and the site prep and those things are not free. Running like a temporary power meter for construction, heating an empty shell during construction so those trades can come in. It's really expensive. So those are all extra costs that I think that people are like, how much is concrete? Like it can't be that much. And you're like, if only that was that was all it took.
Well, and I think too, that's where I have an issue with like some of the, I guess, kind of the big two production builders in our area, like Highline and Adair. Not to like, I'm not talking crap about them, but it's just like, that's the difference. Like they're going to show you the cost for the house.
Right.
They don't show you the cost to put in septic, to run power. How far away is power? Are you going to have the power company come out and set poles so that you can even get power to, your lot, wherever you're buying
all of that
like,
groundwork, trenches.
All of that groundwork.
Yep.
People don't think about like, okay, I want a spigot here. It's like, oh, you do? Okay, well, then you need to plan that now. Like people just, I think, they're like, okay, the house is going to cost $350,000. That's great. Well, that's just a house surrounded by dirt. Like that's nothing. Like, that doesn't take into account all those things that we listed. So yeah, just keeping in mind like a new build, your house costs maybe, X amount of dollars, but then you have to figure, another 30, 40, 50, $100,000 sometimes, depending on depending on septic, power, water. Because I've heard of people up here, that have houses up in the Rimrock drilling 200 feet before they get to water.
Sure.
200 feet is $30,000.
Yeah.
To have someone drill that is $30,000 minimum.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, cool. I just spent $30,000 to find out I don't have water at 200 feet, or I don't have enough water, or I can, I've got, 1 gallon per second. It's like, oh, cool. This sucks. So yeah, it's just things like that you don't think about with the new build necessarily. You think about the house. You don't necessarily think about all the accessory things that you have to do to make that house a home or to make that land usable.
Yeah.
So
one of the additional factors, maybe it's not a factor, maybe it is a factor, but the idea of waste and keeping things more sustainable. And I've heard it argued both ways, rescuing something that exists is more sustainable than building something new. You're not adding to the total thing. And then I've heard the argument that tearing perfectly fine cabinets out of a house is more wasteful than,
Yeah.
there's kind of a limiting factor there. One of the other is getting a home that has all of the conveniences and features. Like I mentioned how much I would love to have a historic home, but I need to like clarify that needs to have a modern kitchen and air conditioning. And there's old houses or whatever. There's cabins still here that like don't have running water. Or like our cabin down on the river has river water, where I'm like, that's not going to work for me ever. I would like to know the water I'm washing my dishes with is not.
I don't want to have, There's a lot of people out here that truck in water because, like I was saying about the well, it was either too expensive for them to even get anyone down there, or they went down, 300-400 feet and hit nothing. And they decided to still build the house there. Or, they had already bought the land or whatever it was. And they're like, well, I guess I'm trucking in water. And it's like, I don't want to do that. That's not for me.
So with certain remodels, there's at least a limiting factor as far as the features that we can reasonably add. So I tell my clients when they're like, could we get whole home automation? And do you want to pay for it though? Because it's already wired. We already have the walls are already covered.
Yeah.
What do you want to pay for? Can we remove that post? Sure. Anything can be done. It's just a matter of whether we want to rip the roof off and
do you want to spend that money?
Redo the structure. What do you want to spend? So there's some things that are just reasonably prohibited as far as somebody considering the way they want to live in their space. If I want a huge Eden Island kitchen, then the historical home is going to be really hard pressed to provide that, just because we're really limited on common space square footage typically in those homes. So, coming up with, usually that means we're going to go outside the footprint. Is that something we're ready to consider? And then there's a matter of architectural styles. I've told you the story of wanting, a super modern house. And it's like, well, your house has a turret. Like it looks like a French chateau. And, we can.
Yeah.
How much of this do you want me to rip apart? Or should we just start fresh for you? Because one thing, is just not going to become another overnight, or even with all the money in the world, maybe. Like this client, they still laugh about it. And I was like pretty serious. They're like, we want a super modern house. I'm like, then how's your fire insurance? Because like, this is not going to become that.
Yeah.
I mean, you just start over. If that's where you want to live, let's pick a different lot. So there's, limiting factors of the house's architecture, the capabilities of the house, all of those kind of things that we really need to dive into. And then regardless if it's a new build or if it's a remodel, there's going to be limiting factors in like neighborhood CC&Rs, and then, lot permissions or lot realities, site realities, which is what you discovered on your project with the floodplain. Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, and that's definitely something that I knew was there, but didn't realize to the extent, what we'd have to do. I mean, I kind of knew, but it's really easy for me to just kind of like, oh yeah, we got to take care of that. And then kind of brush it off. And then I go back to it later. I'm like, oh crap.
No, that's a big deal. I had this client that has a beautiful house right on the Deschutes. So right on the river, everything that you could want, docks and everything grandfathered in, and this beautiful property. But since the house was built, the build setback has changed for river frontage properties.
Yeah.
So half of the house basically fell inside of this. We will no longer allow development within this setback from the river, and half of the house didn't. So they were wanting an addition and they were wanting some different spaces. Yeah. And it was like, we cannot touch unless it's maintenance, we cannot touch anything beyond this imaginary line down the center of your house.
Yeah.
So if you want an addition, we can have a 90-foot hallway going this way because we can build over here.
Yeah.
But we can't touch these things. And this was well into kind of the remodel process. Like they bought the house with the idea that they would remodel this house.
Yeah.
And come to find out, as we contacted the county and talked about land use, it was like, so we should have had this conversation before you bought it.
Well, yeah. I mean, we're running into that on property. Yeah.
We can't do that.
Yeah.
And that's nobody's fault other than there's a long process before we even put shovels in the ground.
Yeah.
Of figuring out what's possible and what you want.
Yeah, and like I said, we're even finding that out with my house because it is beautiful, but it's right on the creek. And when they put the house there were no land use laws, regulating how close you could be to the creek or not. They didn't even have land use laws on how close you could have your septic to the creek. Like right now, the old septic of the house is literally 20 feet from the creek, and that would never pass.
Delicious.
Ever, But yeah, so we have to address the septic. We have to address the location of the house because, I think we're going to end up only being able to really do a bunch of work to a certain half of the house. Barring we get, we don't get like ODF and W approval or Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife approval. It can be really interesting. So I don't know. We'll see what happens there. It's kind of exciting. Nerve-wracking, but exciting.
Just waiting for information. What are we allowed to do on this property that we already bought?
I know. Yeah, what are we allowed to do?
It's going to be fun.
Anyway. Yeah. Let's see. What else do we have that we wanted to talk about?
Well, I think in all of this, as you weigh these decisions, whether or not to build, whether or not to remodel, it makes a lot of sense to do that with a lot of input. I think that a lot of people kind of, do their research or dive into this decision-making process and decide on something and then find a team to execute what they have decided, which is not inherently wrong, but I think that your team should be bringing some value to the table.
Yeah.
So your team should be able to weigh in on that conversation. They should be helping you consider the equity. They should be helping you
work through the permit process. They should be helping you.
Figure out land use, figure out who to call, who to ask questions of, helping you kind of put rough numbers together. If we choose this build option in this area, I know water is an issue, or I know, running electrical from the road 175 feet back to where we want to build that's not nothing, or, any of those things.
Yeah.
Your team can really speak to that and bring some clarity for you to make the best decision for you and your family.
Yeah.
So we've said before, we're a big advocate of being brought into projects early. Even before the scope, even before those decisions are made. So I have, we're considering 3 different lots. What do you think? Which I love.
Say that's great.
And I hope, I've been told, the clients have said, like, this was really, really helpful to have your perspective on, our priorities. Here's what we're considering.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be crazy expensive to bring in a contractor and a designer into this decision-making process. A lot of contractors and designers have hourly rates, which, you're going to be paying anyway. But to bring them in, you may say like, hey, like, we're trying to come up with this. We'd really like to use you, but right now we're just trying to figure out what's going to be the best option for us on these 2 pieces of property. Like, we'd love to pay you for your time to come out here and, really help us talk through this. And most contractors, designers are going to be all for being able to work with you and try and figure out, the best process, because the designer's certainly going to have, a different perspective as to what would be best for location of the house and stuff like that. And then the contractor's also going to have a really good idea of, some hard costs or some general costs for what it's going to take to put the house exactly where you're,
Right.
talking about doing it. Because that's another thing we don't talk about too with a new build. Like excavation is a really big deal that people don't like. I want to put my house right here on this mountain. It's like, oh, that's great. So we're going to have to cut a road. We're going to have,
Yeah.
So just things that you don't think about. And if you can bring a contractor in, if you can bring a designer in, or ideally both of them in to work together, then you're going to come up with a much more solid plan moving forward. And Brittany and I would love it if you used us, from beginning to end. But even if you're able to bring in a designer, bring in someone now, and you're like, okay, we've bought the land, but we're not going to build for, 3 to 5 years, there's still pieces of that puzzle that you can be putting together,
Right.
during that time. And I think that's kind of what you're saying is like, it's not necessarily a bad thing to bring in a designer or a contractor really early on, just so that you can then begin to make these strides towards your overall goal, whether it be a new build or a renovation or, whatever it is. But bringing us in early enough that we can actually make an impact that will then hopefully cost you less in the long run, because you're front loading all of these things that maybe you didn't think about, and you're able to save, or you're able to kind of, bid projects out and figure things out earlier rather than on the fly.
Yeah.
Oh crap, we didn't do this. Let's fix it.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that, at the beginning of this, I alluded to both options are hard to walk through and to live through. They're stressful. They have an impact on, on your life for
on your
sure.
marriage, on everything.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that the idea is that doing that alone, or especially when you don't know. I mean, I've worked with clients that have built 17 houses before, and they're not a builder. They're not a designer. They're not considering all the things, even if they've been around this for many times. Bringing in a team early is just is save you some of that headache, and some of that questioning process. So, reach out to people. It costs very little in the long run.
Yeah.
And hopefully, if the right people, will shed a lot of light on how to make the best decision.
Yeah. It does cost. Like, that is something, like, you are investing in your property, right? You're investing in your property from the beginning. It's not, I think getting the right people out there is going to cost you money, and that's okay. It's okay to pay the right people to come out and help you figure this stuff out. I just think oftentimes you're like, I'm going to pay $15,000 and you may very well pay $15,000 over the course of the process to get your house, or to get your plans and everything ready to build. But I think just being able to just recognize, like, okay, this is what we're doing, these are our goals, and saying, I'm going to bring in the right people to help me figure that out. Because like you're saying, it's a super daunting task to try and figure this out if you haven't done it yourself, or if you haven't done it at all before. And I feel like most of the time, of the people that I'm working with, most of them have never done a renovation before. And so you're walking them through the process. It's like, in their head, they're just going, yeah, we want to do a kitchen remodel. We want to add this. We want to take this out. But the reality is, like, there's so many more steps that need to take place that you just don't think about unless you have someone on your side that can kind of advocate for that, and also just help you learn what you don't know.
Right.
So, yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Is that the renovate versus new build? Does that wrap it up?
I think so. I mean, there's so many other things that I think you could probably talk about on renovation versus new build. I think ultimately you need to make the best decision for your family moving forward. You need to be able to look at the 3 to 5 to 15 year timeline. Like, maybe you are only going to be in a place for 3 to 5 years, and it's going to, change the direction in which you go. But if you're like me, we're looking at this property that we just bought. We're looking at the 15, 20 year timeline, because we know it's going to be 20 years before all of our kids are potentially out of college, and maybe not coming home as much for holidays or off doing their own thing. So it's like, we know that we have at least 20 years in this home, that we want to make it as good as we can right now, so that it's going to fit our lifestyle and take care of our kids and us into the future. So, you know, and with that, that can, you know, that same process needs to happen on a new build or renovation. You know, is this going to meet our family's goals and needs? So many times I think that we're like, yeah, this would be cool, let's do it. But we don't have the foresight to think further in the future and be like, oh, I wish I had done this differently. In which case you're paying more to change it later, or, you know, you're living with something that's inconvenient for you for the long haul. So, yeah, if you guys have any more questions specifically about new build or renovation, or you're like, they said this thing and they didn't really complete their thought, just let us know. Email us at hello@thedesignbuildpodcast. We'd love to hear your questions or comment on this video, or just do something to let us know, like, you know, you have a question about what we've talked about, and we'll do our best to answer that either in another video or another podcast. So that we can kind of give you the information you need to make the best decision possible, because it is a big decision. So
the biggest that most of us make where we live.
That's true. It's the biggest investment that most people are going to make is the home. So yeah, it's kind of a big deal. So
yeah, let us know if we missed something. Thanks for watching.
Yeah. See ya.